Excellent. Welcome. All righty, let's get started. So, a little bit about who we are here at Boolean. We are an automation consulting company and we work exclusively with residential and commercial painting businesses. We don't work with any other trades, just painters. And our sweet spot is companies in the $4 to $15 million range who are ready to scale without piling on overhead. Our goal is to help you automate and streamline as much of your business as possible, from estimating and scheduling to job costing and reporting, so you can grow efficiently with the right tools in place. PaintScout is the estimating tool we recommend, and we're really excited to partner with them today. This webinar will focus on how setting up your production rates properly in PaintScout can unlock better automation and cleaner data flow into your CRM and operational tools. So, without further ado, let's get started. So on our agenda today for our webinar, I'm going to introduce you to who you'll be seeing here today. We're going to talk about what production rates really are and why they matter, how to calculate them the right way, what data PaintScout can send out to other tools via automation, and we'll end today with a Q&A. The real reason of why we're here today is because at Boolean, we've had clients tell us changing or customizing production rates seems like a daunting task. Well, we want to help take away that daunting feeling today. So who's going to be speaking with you? My name is Kiley. I'm the Boolean process engineer. We have our subject matter expert, Sam Woolridge, the client success coach over at PaintScout, and she'll be with us today. And our final panelist and presenter is Chris Kiefer, the Boolean co-founder and our fearless leader over at Boolean. So I'm going to kick things on over to Miss Sam, and she's going to take over from here.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kiley. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Sam. I'm a client success coach here at PaintScout, and I'm sure I've spoke with a lot of you before. So today I'm here to go through setting up and building production rates in your PaintScout account. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to pull up PaintScout. Amazing. So hopefully everybody can see that PaintScout screen okay.
Looks great.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we are going to be talking about production rates today. So we're going to get started by heading to the production rate section of our account settings. So I'm going to go ahead and click my person icon in the top right corner, and then I'm going to go to the account settings section. And then from there, I'm going to go to the left-hand side, find my production rates, and I'll start with rate categories. Perfect. So I'm going to open up a standard wall rate as an example here. And before we dive in, let's just talk about what production rates are, because I know that some of you might not actually be using time-based production rates to build your estimates at the moment. So essentially, a production rate is just the average amount of time it takes to complete a task. And production rates use two variables, and the most common variables used are going to be either square feet per hour, linear feet per hour, or hours per item. Now, it's important to understand that production rate estimation, aka time-based estimation, is what PaintScout was built for, and it's our recommended form of estimation. It's not the only way that you can quote in PaintScout. So some people actually quote by the square foot and just do dollar per square foot. So common variables are dollar per square foot, dollar per linear foot, and then dollars per item. And then some people are going to forego production rate estimation altogether, and they actually use line item estimation. So in your account settings, you can go to the line item section here. If I scroll down, I have this carpentry repair line item. And as you can see, it's just a name and a description, and I'm basically entering any commonly used information here. And then when we build an estimate and we use this line item, these users are going to use the hour/cost button down here to attach a price to this line item. So they might be looking at these carpentry repairs and they're going, okay, I think this is going to take me 8 hours. And so they're throwing 8 hours into the box here, and it's automatically calculating your price based on your hourly rate. Or they might be using a quantity-based price. So essentially they're going, okay, I charge, let's say $100 per repair, and I have 8 repairs. So the system will do your math for you there. Or a custom price, which is a flat fee. So they might just look at a job and go, okay, I think this is going to be about $800, and they're throwing that in there. So while line item pricing is definitely easy and simple, especially if you've quoted a lot of jobs in the past, line items don't use dimensions to calculate a price. And so line item pricing is essentially used when you're guessing. Now, I understand that you might have been doing this for 30 years, and so you can look at a job and you just know how much it's going to cost or how many hours it's going to take. But at the end of the day, it's still a guess, and it's never going to be as scalable as production rates are. So, when you are working with Boolean and you're connecting to platforms like HubSpot and Airtables, you're going to have the ability to send over really important information like the job's hours, the material costs, the labor costs, your hourly rate, and the total price. So if you're somebody who asks yourself, like, why would I take the time to switch over to time-based estimation? That is one big reason right there. It is going to give you the richest data possible and the best amount of data, and it's also going to help you use these integrations to their fullest capabilities. So if you are not using time-based production rate estimation, you are missing out on a lot of things. And production rate estimation, it's going to make your life easier in the long run because it's going to be super scalable. It's going to take away any form of guessing, and calculating your budgets and things like your profitability is just going to become so much easier. So if you are interested in getting started with production rate estimation, I'll just hop back over to that production rate section there. You should see that everybody's account here comes preloaded with a list of PaintScout default production rates. So our production rates are based on industry standards and averages from our users, so they are a great place to start. That said, we do recommend tweaking them to fit your painters and your sub speeds as you go, and we also recommend adding to the list of production rates in here to get a more extensive list in your account, because we do start you with the basics, but it's not going to be everything. And I will say that our most successful users are continuously updating and adding to their production rates based on their sales reps' needs as well. So let's take a bit of a deep dive into production rates. And I'm actually going to start with rate categories, which is what you're seeing on your screen here. So the simplest way to explain a rate category is just that it is a folder for your production rates. So you're going to see here the rate category is walls. It's for interior estimates. And then our production rates are standard walls, two-story walls, strip wallpaper, and install wallpaper. Now, this is how it comes laid out in your PaintScout account, but if you're somebody who wants to create a rate category specifically for wallpapering and throw strip wallpaper and install wallpaper in there, you're welcome to do that. You have the ability to customize these rate categories however you see fit, okay? So now we're going to hop into building production rates. So let's say I want to build a production rate and I want it under my walls category. All I'm going to do is hit that add button down at the bottom. It's going to open up this add rate screen. And from here, I'm just going to work from the top down, and we're going to go through all of this together today. So the very first thing that you are going to see is the internal label. So your internal label might be something like 1-story, smooth walls, change color. Now, you're also going to have a client label. So if you do not want your client to see this long, bulky label, you can actually enter a separate client label here, which might just be walls. So essentially, 1-story smooth walls change color is what you're going to see when you're building the estimate, and it's also what your crew is going to see on the work order, whereas your client label is what's client facing. It's what they see on the estimate. It's just going to say walls. Now, if you leave the client label section blank, it is just going to use the internal label. So you don't have to create a client label if you don't want to, okay? Then we're gonna hop down here into the rate calculation section. Now, we kind of already touched on the different variables that you can use when building production rates. Again, the most common ones are gonna be square feet per hour, linear feet per hour, and hours per item. Now, when you are measuring a wall, you're measuring it in square footage. So the most logical thing to do here is to make your variable 1 square feet and your variable 2 hours. But I will point out there's also a couple different square feet options. So if you're measuring the ceiling, that would be the ceiling square footage. And then that floor square footage that you see here as well, this is going to be used for like decks or maybe epoxy, right? Now, linear feet per hour, that's typically going to be used for anything that you measure in linear footage. So baseboards, crowns, soffits, fascia, anything like that. And then hours per item is used for anything that you can break down by an average size. So door frames, doors, garage door frames, shutters. But then also, windows, you can even break it down by small, medium, and large windows and then create hours per item for those. Now, the next thing you're going to see on your screen is the use codes to calculate rate box. Now, if you're doing anything with painting, you're most likely using coats to calculate your rate because obviously there's different coats. You might be doing 1 coat, 2, 3, or 4 coats, right? But anything on the prep side of things, like power washing, scraping, sanding, you don't need to use coats for that. So you can always just uncheck this box here, and then it's only going to give you one option for a production rate instead of multiple for multiple coats. And then down here, we have the actual coat boxes where we enter our production rates. So calculating production rates does require a little bit of data and a little bit of math, but please do not just get discouraged because I promise it is really simple math. And we're going to be going through some quick calculations together right now. But if you are interested in learning more about, how to calculate these production rates, we have a ton of resources available on our website in the form of like webinars, podcast episodes, articles. So definitely check that out. And if you have any additional questions, you're welcome to reach out to support@paintscout.com, and we can always do our best to help you out. But I'm going to head over to the spreadsheet that I've created here today, and we're going to work on the spreadsheet together. So like I mentioned, production rates do require a little bit of data. So what I've done here is I'm pretending that I went to a job site and I timed my painters. So I figured out how many square feet they were painting and I timed them, okay? So in our example here, my painters were painting 1,000 square feet of walls, and I timed them when they did their first coat, and it took them 10 hours to do that first coat. And just so everybody knows, when I say 10 hours, I mean 10 man hours. Doesn't matter if there was 2 people on the job site, 3 people, or just 1 person, it was 10 man hours, okay? So all I'm gonna do to calculate this production rate here is take my wall square footage, which is 1,000, divided by 10 hours, which means that my production rate for 1 coat is 100 square feet an hour, okay? Now we're gonna move down here to the second coat. So kind of similar, but there is an extra step in here because we are not interested in learning what the time was for the second coat. We actually wanna know regarding 2 full coats, okay? So our production rates should always be in full coats. So when I timed them, the second coat took them 8 hours. But again, I wanna know what the production rate is for 2 full coats. So I'm gonna take my 8 hours for the second coat plus my 10 hours for the first coat to get me 18 hours. And all I'm gonna do is divide 1,000 square feet by 18 hours, and my production rate is gonna be 55.6 square feet an hour. Now you can round up, you can call it 56, you can call it 55, it's not gonna make that much of a difference. Now we're gonna do this exact same thing again. So for our third coat, it took them 7 hours. So all I'm gonna do is add my 7 hours to the 18 hours they already took for the first and second coat to give me 25 hours. So my production rate for 3 full coats is 1,000 square feet divided by 25 hours to give me 40 square feet an hour. And then one last time, we're gonna say that fourth coat took me the same amount of time as my third coat. It was another 7 hours. So I'm just doing 7 plus the 25 hours to give me 32. And 1,000 square feet divided by 32 hours is 31.3 square feet per hour, okay? And I've just thrown it in this box down here so you can easily see it, but these are essentially the numbers I'm gonna throw into PaintScout. 100 for the first coat, 56 for 2 full coats, 40 for 3 full coats, and 31 for 4 full coats, okay? So a couple of good indicators that you've done something right here. First of all, when you are working with square feet or linear feet per hour, these numbers should always go downwards, okay? And that's because the more coats that you have to do in 1 hour, the less square feet that you can paint in that 1 hour. So it's always gonna go downwards. Now, the second indicator that you've done something right is I always like to compare, my first and second coat especially. And what I mean by that is like, if we were in a perfect world where the second, third, and fourth coat always took the same amount of time as the first coat, this number would go down by 50% each time, right? So we would go from 100 to 50 to 25 to 12.5. That being said, that's not how it works. We're painters. We know that, the second coat can sometimes be 65, 75, 85% of the time as the first coat. So a good indicator that you've done something right here is just to make sure that these numbers aren't going down by more than 50% each time. Like if our second coat was at 40, that's maybe an indicator that something's wrong because why would our second coat take longer than our first coat? Okay. So with all that being said, this is what we're gonna enter into PaintScout. So I'm just hopping over and I'm gonna enter that into the coats boxes. So we said 100 for the first coat, 55 for 2 full coats, 40 for 3 full coats, and I believe it was 30 for 4 full coats. Beautiful. So if you're curious how you should be reading a production rate, just know that anything that's in this box here directly correlates with variable 1 and variable 2. So the way that I would read this out loud is it'll take me, or I can paint 100 square feet in 1 hour when I am doing 1 coat of paint. I can paint 55 square feet in 1 hour when I'm doing 2 coats of paint. I can paint 40 square feet in an hour when I'm painting 3 full coats, and 30 square feet in an hour when I'm painting 4 full coats. Okay, so that's essentially production rate estimation in a nutshell. So now let's talk about our default coats. So you should see that drop-down menu here where it says default coats. You're just going to want to select the number of coats that you use the most often. So if 9 times out of 10, when you're quoting at 2 coats, that would be your default. Now this can be switched on a per estimate basis. So if you get to a job and you're only doing 1 coat, or you're doing 3 coats or 4 coats, you can switch this, but choose the default number of coats. That's going to save you time, the one that you quote with the most. Now, default product is going to be super similar. It's here to save you time. So you're going to choose the product that you quote with the most when you are quoting 1-story, smooth walls, change color. So let's just say that's Sherwin-Williams interior super paint here. I'm assigning that as the default. Now, every single time I add this production rate to an estimate, it's going to auto calculate the materials for me, and it's going to base it on super paint. Now, I understand that when it comes to paint, things change a lot. You're going to go to a quote and the client wants to upgrade, they want to downgrade, they might be supplying the paint, and so you're not charging them for materials at all. But again, choose the paint product that you quote with the most, and then hopefully you're only going to have to change it when you get to an estimate if the client tells you they want to go in a different direction. Next, we have the coverage rate box. Now, this coverage rate box is what I call a special coverage rate box. So we're quoting smooth walls here, and our coverage rate for super paint is set to, let's say, 350 square feet a gallon. That's not going to change when I'm quoting smooth walls. That's actually what the production rate is based off of, right? Or the coverage rate is based off of. I apologize. But if we were making a production rate here for something like textured walls, so we'll go textured walls. Now, the coverage rate might not actually be 350 square feet a gallon because textured walls are more porous. So if that's the case, maybe our coverage rate is more so something like 250 square feet a gallon. So this is where we use a special coverage rate. Whatever you enter here is overwriting what you've entered in the product section of your account settings for Super Paint. So again, you are only using this box when the coverage rate that you've set here does not apply. Otherwise, you can leave it blank. Then we have a couple last things here. Next up, we have the note section. So you're going to see we have the area view description, surface view description, and crew note section. So area view description is for when you are presenting in area view, which is the default view in PaintScout. So it means you're breaking down your estimate by rooms. So bedroom, bathroom, living room, etc. On an exterior, it's going to be front, right, back, and left, or just whole house or garage, something like that. Whereas surface view description is for when you are presenting in surface view, which means you're breaking down your estimate by surface. So walls, ceilings, baseboards, crown, etc. Now, you can never present in the same view at the same time, which means that these two notes will never appear on the estimate at the same time. So if you are somebody who likes to switch back and forth between area view and surface view, you can actually add the same note into both of these boxes here, and it'll appear depending on which view you're presenting in. Okay. Now, I do just want to take a moment to say that these sections should not really be used for every single production rate. Like, in my opinion, you should not be adding notes to every single production rate. Instead, you should be using line items to add information or general information about like your prep process, because you scrape and you sand and you spot prime, or if you want to talk about your products, your application, the number of coats, your deposit info, all of that stuff should be in line items, in my opinion, just because it's so much cleaner and neater for your client. Whereas these two boxes here, the view descriptions, these should really only be used in situations where you absolutely want a note to be attached to the surface or the room itself, okay? Then we have the crew note section, and the crew note section is pretty straightforward. Crew notes appear on the work order. They do not appear on the estimate anywhere for your client. It is just for your crew. So if you always want a note attached on the work order for your crew, throw that in here. And then the last thing that we have in this production rate section is the advanced option section. So first up, you're going to see hide from customer. Now, this is often used to hide things like prep production rates, because like I already mentioned, a lot of times people are going to be using line items to talk about, hey, we prep because we scrape and we sand and we power wash and we caulk and we fill cracks and whatever it is. You're using a line item for all that info. So your client doesn't necessarily need to see that you have this included on every single surface in every single room or on the exterior, every single side of the house. So if you enable hide from customer, it will hide this specific production rate from the area or from the surface itself. And it'll only apply, like you're only going to show it in the line item section of your estimates. That being said, the price is still going to be included in the estimate, and it's still going to be visible on the work order for your crew. You're only hiding it from the client themselves. And then the last two options is the show coats and the show price. They're pretty similar, so I'm going to talk about them together. Now, if beside each surface in brackets, you want it to say 2 coats, so it's going to say walls 2 coats, ceilings 2 coats, etc. And then you also want the price. So again, in brackets, it's going to say the walls price is this much, the ceiling price is this much. You can enable both of these settings here. Again, this is going to create your estimate to get super crowded, especially if you're doing a bunch of rooms with a bunch of surfaces. So I don't necessarily recommend always having this enabled, but I do understand this can become quite useful, especially when you're working on commercial jobs and they really need a precise breakdown of your pricing. At that point, great idea to enable these and show them on the estimate. So that is how you build a production rate from scratch. That production rate is good and ready to go. But I do want to point out, if you're going to be starting by working off of the PaintScout defaults, which is what we recommend because it's going to give you a nice base to start with, and you want to edit some of these production rates, all you have to do is click on them to edit them. So same thing as we just saw when we were building a production rate, you have the full ability to come in here and change all of these fields as you see fit or as you need to. Beautiful. Okay, so that is everything that I have for you guys today. Thanks so much for listening to me speak for the last 20 minutes. I'm going to pass it back to Chris now to talk just a little bit more about production rates and how they integrate when you're working with Boolean.
Thank you so much, Sam. All right, so thank you all for coming. And I guess what I'm thinking about is showing you the end state of why I think this is such a critical piece that people need to focus on. First thing is, depending on the size of your business currently, and also the size that you want to grow, some of the stuff that Sam's talking about may feel more complex than is needed. But I will tell you from working with very large painting companies, 10, 12, 15 million in revenue, they all use production rate estimating. If you're a smaller company, 1 to 2 million or smaller, there's obviously you can get by and just make things work without worrying about the complexity or the feeling of complexity that comes from production rates. But I wanted to show a few, like, I guess the way I think about it is I want to understand, okay, I understand how to build production rates, but why do I need these? Or what is this supposed to facilitate in my production scheduling or reporting or whatever? So I have a couple examples that I wanted to pull up here and tell me, you guys can all see this hopefully.
You can see your screen. Looks great.
So depending on the model of your business. So we work with subcontractor model businesses, W-2. Sometimes there's a hybrid of both. This is an example of a dashboard that we can create based on using production rates. So if you're a W-2 based company, you know that if all of the people that are your production employees were working, that would be 1,600 hours a week or 17 or 18, or maybe it's 800 hours a week. But you can manage your hours more effectively and also grade how did we do in actuals compared to what we estimated it was going to take. And so this is an example of a dashboard that if we said, show me all the revenue that we have on the schedule after today for the rest of the year. This top one is showing you by week how much revenue. And again, if you're not using production rates, you would be able to generate something like this, and you would know that I've got 185,000 scheduled in the week of July 13th. But what you don't have, if you're not doing production rates, you would not have the ability to see that I have 772 hours booked. And maybe you know that you can, like, you have another 1,000 hours of work that you could sell in the week of the 13th because you know that you can produce 1,700 hours a week, for example. Another example here would be when you are tracking when you are tracking hours and like the estimated hours that you think it's going to take for something to get done, we can show you inside of a given project how many hours were budgeted for this project, how many hours were used, and how many hours you have remaining. So you can see here, they've got 12.3 hours remaining on this project that's supposed to end today. So that actually looks like they're going to be on track for that. You can go to a project that is earlier in the stage, and I can see that I've got a budget of 1,390 total, and I've only used 229. So, maybe we potentially need to extend the date because I don't think we're going to be able to finish by June 18th or whatever. And again, all of this fine tuning of your schedule becomes possible when you are tracking production rates or when you are estimating using a production rate based system, because that's what allows you to get revenue, hours, material costs, hourly rates, and your total labor. And then that's what we can use to actually facilitate dashboards like this. See, one other thing. So another thing that's very powerful with the way that PaintScout structures their data is they pass to us the total number of, this is in their API, so we integrate directly with PaintScout, and they pass the total price of the quote, the labor total, the material total, total hours, and hourly rate. So that's what we take into HubSpot. And then with that information, we can see what our material cost is and the amount that we believe labor is going to cost us. And we can give you an estimate on how much gross profit you will make by week throughout the course of the year. And so like, for example, here we have 240,000 of revenue scheduled for exterior painting projects specifically, and we're projected to do 107,000 of gross profit on that in exterior painting specifically. I could take that off and say business wide, we're going to do 372,000, and this is from today forward. I could also say, I just want to look at is within this calendar month. So this month alone, here's how it breaks down. We're going to do 293,000 and have 126,000 in gross profit. Again, all of this is only useful or possible. It's useful for every business. It's only possible if you're using the production rate system, because that's what's driving the reporting on all this. If any of you have questions, please put them in the chat, because I feel like there's so much to talk about here, and I'm going to jump to the next topic for me. But the biggest thing is knowing that what can PaintScout output, and that's what I just covered, is your price, your labor, material, total hours, and hourly rate. Those are the top 5. And then we take those out of PaintScout, put them into HubSpot, and the sales rep then wins the job and pushes it into Airtable. What else here? Yeah, I think that ultimately, if you are a subcontractor model business, doing the production rate is still useful for you in trying to get an accurate price. But a lot of people, if you're using a subcontractor model, you don't want to show the subcontractors how many hours you estimated it would take to get that price. You just want to give them, here's the project and here's what I'm going to pay you, go do the work. And so that doesn't, or because of that, it doesn't mean that we don't care about hours. We just want to selectively show or hide the hours to certain people. Whereas with W-2 businesses, it's very useful to show your team this. We think it's going to take 150 hours for you to do this work. See if you can beat it. You know, can you get 105% productivity and do better than the estimated? And again, with, especially if you're a W-2 business, tracking or not tracking hours is like you're just shooting yourself in the foot, because you have to, that's how you manage your company, is by tracking. You know, it doesn't really matter how much revenue we did. I want to know how much are we utilizing the people that we have, and do we have more capacity for people to work more hours? Because again, if we have 10 people and they each work 8 hours a day, that means I can do 80 hours of scheduled work every day, which comes out to 400 hours a week. So I know that if we don't have 400 hours of work, we have an opportunity to do more. Or when you're trying to give customers an estimate of when you think their project can take place, that becomes much easier to do when you know roughly how long the project's going to take, and you can start putting onto your calendar rough estimates of when projects will wrap up, so you know when to schedule the next one. And I think that's the only, that's all that I have. I have a couple other random examples, but I guess I'll pause and see if there's any questions, Kylie. And then, yeah, I think that's all I got.
So this first question is for Sam. Within PaintScout, is it possible for sales reps to have the ability to edit markup on quotes without changing the inputs like labor hours and gallons?
Oh yeah, that is a great question. I'm going to quickly share my screen so I can show you how to do that. Amazing. Okay. Yeah, so when you are building an estimate, in the sidebar menu on the right-hand side, there is a calculations tab. And so you can always come in here, you can click on the subtotal, and if you know how much you want to mark it up by, you can either enter a dollar value or a percentage. Like if you need to mark this job up by 5%, you can just throw that in here, and it's going to increase your subtotal, but it does not affect your labor or your material price. So that's why you get a little warning sign letting you know, like, hey, this no longer equals each other, but you can definitely mark it up and not mess up your production rates or your materials or anything like that, if you want to.
Thanks, Sam. Our next question is for Chris. Who do you recommend is responsible for tracking the hours, labor, and expenses on a job?
Yeah, I would say, well, getting the hours correct. Actually, this is a, let me pull this up. So, this is actually a big thing that I would say I would highly recommend you implement this process. I know some businesses that will have, when the quote is accepted in PaintScout, it automatically goes to production, directly from PaintScout to production. I do not recommend that. I think the reason is because obviously there's a lot of data in PaintScout, but oftentimes there's some nuance or some clarification that the sales rep probably needs to give to your production team, to either adjust hours or clarify how they like spread hours out across the project, or give notes or instructions. And so this is my recommendation, is that so as far as who is responsible for tracking the hours and whatnot, I would say your sales rep is responsible to get your total cost, total labor, materials, hours, and discounts, if there are any, in your CRM system. And the way that I like to do that is when a customer or when a quote is accepted, it goes to a stage inside of your system that's called customer accepted. And then when I go to win it as a sales rep, so I'm going to click 1, and I'm trying to move this deal to the 1 stage. There's the ability, and again, lots of CRMs have this. This is a HubSpot example, but I can like basically gate or prevent people from moving information or moving a deal to 1 unless they fill out all of these fields. So I'm like, as a sales rep, I'm trying to save this, but I can't save it because there is a field or a data point that I have said sales reps are responsible for giving to the rest, like to the production team. And it's their job to come in and say, oh, notes for the field, I have to clarify. And I could say, there's nothing of note here, but I could say, make sure we do the kitchen first, whatever, and leave a note there. And now that I've filled out that, you can notice there's other things like you have to make sure that they clarify the material amount, the total amount of the job, if there was a discount. And the thing is that most of this, probably 80 to 90% of this, is automatically filled in when the job is accepted from PaintScout. So it pushes into HubSpot. But I still think that, and I would highly recommend that the sales rep owns verifying and validating all of this information before they send it to production. Because one of the biggest tension or rubs in a painting business is the sales reps not being very detail oriented and passing off half-baked or unclear instructions to production. And then production's trying to call sales and get clarity on things, but sales are running appointments. So it really bogs things down. But if you take the time to map out what is required, and this particular client, they don't have, I think they're a subcontractor model, so they don't pass the hours to production. But that's another thing that you could have in here is say, you cannot win a job unless the number of hours that this is supposed to take is filled out. And then when they save it, now the job is won, and we know that all of the data points that we need for our reporting have been input correctly with no gaps or errors or anything like that. So that's who I would say is sales is responsible for initially getting that data in. But then as far as tracking it ongoing, that's where I would say if you take the time to set the system up intelligently, we actually can automatically, we integrate with QuickBooks Time, so we can pull in data automatically from QuickBooks Time. And so no one is having to track how many hours have already been worked, because QuickBooks Time is just, we're going and extracting hours every hour, how many total hours have been worked on these different projects. And you can see that once you get that into Airtable, for example, that's what allows us to say, your budget was this many hours, you've worked this many hours, and this is how many hours you have remaining. Same thing for expenses. We just extract the expense data directly from QuickBooks. So I'm a big fan of your managers and your lead painters seeing the dashboards of how things are going, but you want to, as much as possible, have all of that data be automated or pulled in. So you're there. I like to use the analogy of flying a plane. There needs to be a bunch of dashboards and metrics that the pilot is looking at. But if the pilot had to calculate all of those metrics or do a bunch of manual work to get the metric, that wouldn't be a very, safe plane to be on. But when you have all the data automatically coming in, and then I'm just looking at it and seeing ooh, that's odd. Why do we have so many hours worked in this one? Maybe someone logged the wrong hours, and I go, talk to that employee or whatever the case is. But that's who I would say should be responsible for tracking that.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Sam, I actually have a follow-up question for you on that previous question. When you do the percent markup, is there a way to do that in the template to cover credit card fees?
Oh, so that is a great question. No, you can't do it in our template, because a template is going to be what we call smart, right? So it updates automatically when you make changes in your account settings. So certain things you can't edit directly on the template. That being said, we do have a surcharging feature. So if you are invoicing in PaintScout and you're, you're using Stripe or PaintScout payments, there is an automatic surcharge fee that you can build in to your estimates. And it'll be on top of, the payment amount, rather than having to build it using a markup.
Awesome. Another question for you, Chris. Can I customize what gets pulled from PaintScout into my CRM?
Yes. So within reason, PaintScout's been really great in working with us and taking suggestions that have come from our clients. But if it's available in the API, in PaintScout's API, we can extract that or map it to different things. I would say that those 5 fields that I mentioned are they cover 95% of the stuff that you would care about. And then there's a few situations where we've done some custom stuff for like large commercial companies or companies that want very specific things tracked. But I would say for the most part, the fields that are available in the API are more than enough for companies.
So we have 5 minutes here. I'd love to try to get a couple more questions in if you guys have time. This one's for Sam. Can I create different production rates for different surface types or substrates like stucco versus vinyl?
Yeah, 100%. So kind of like you saw today on my interior example where I was doing, smooth walls and textured walls, same thing for exterior. A lot of people are going to break it down by surface type. For siding, especially, you can have vinyl, you can have wood, you could do stucco. You can create as many production rates as you want.
Awesome. Alrighty, I think we've got time for one more. Chris, how do production rates affect scheduling automations in Airtable?
Let me pull something up. I think I understand what that's asking. So as far as when you, I would say it's actually not production rates that affect scheduling. It's the hours that are created or identified or generated from the production rate strategy that you're using in your estimating. But what we have done for our clients is if you have different people, different leads, they could be subcontractors or lead just W-2 employees, is we allow you to go and say, like, what's the number of hours that this particular lead painter can produce daily. So 24 hours a day would mean this guy typically works with a 3-person crew. This guy works solo. He only does 8 hours a day. This guy's a 2-person crew. And so you can come in and say that Wendy is a 24-hour per day lead employee. So when I assign a project with Wendy as the lead, and let me go here. Nope, that's not it. Yeah, so like this, for example, if I go into, this is an example of how we would schedule. But if we look, so we're going to say that Jeff can do 8 hours per day. So this project is, what was the total number of hours on this? This project is 95 hours. So if I assign Jeff as the lead here, Jeff does not do that. So you can see here that Jeff only is capable of doing those things. So I'm going to pick, let's do Josh instead. Josh does 8 hours. So do Josh. So when I assign Josh as the lead, because Josh can do 8 hours a day, it's telling me automatically that the duration of this project is going to be 12 days. So if I were to schedule this starting the 26th, it's going to calculate 12 working days from the 26th and then output the projected end date based on that duration. If I, undo that and move back to, so now I'm going to pick a different lead, and let's pick a lead that has 24 hours a day. So Jose, when I put Jose in for this project, and Jose doesn't have the required, so you can see in our system, we have badges for communication and detail, kind of like rates the painters on how skilled they are, how good of communicators they are. So this project is not allowing Jose to be scheduled because he's only an average communicator, precision and detail. So we're not going to put him on that project. So I'm going to find someone like Wayne who does 24 hours and is a 3 across the board on all those. So when I go back to pick Wayne, you can see that the total duration is calculated at 4 because, again, it was 95 hours, I think, divided by 24. That rounds up to 4 days. So when I schedule it for the 26th, it's now going to be completed on the 29th. So it is like you can still adjust that. So if I go back to my schedule here and look at the timeline, I can go find Wayne where I just scheduled this project for, let's go to today. And Wayne's painting. So here's the one I just scheduled. And I could say, I want to actually say that this needs to be completed sooner. So I'm going to shorten it to 3 work days. Or, you can still have the power to adjust or override, but it's just giving you the ability to quickly schedule, like, especially for large projects with hundreds of hours. It's just nice to not have to do that math. But hopefully that answers the question on how the hours can help you with scheduling.
Yeah. So I really want to thank both Sam and Chris for their expertise today. We have run out of time. We're officially 1 minute over, but the gold that we were able to get from you guys was worth it. I really appreciate everyone who attended. And just like if you've joined our webinars in the past, you know that we'll send a recording of today's webinar to your email once our editors at Boolean are done, and it's posted on our YouTube page. So thank you very much. Hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.